Alright guys, I'm here back with a new video, and in this video we're back with another video revolving around Jeff Probst. This time we're going to be talking about his favorite episodes for every season. Where I'd like to thank Radio Ranger for my Twitch chat for this idea, but again, we'll be running through every season of the show, talking about what episode I think Jeff Probst would say is his favorite, specifically under the context if you were literally to just sit him down and ask him this question, where I do think that context does shake up this list a little bit in comparison to situations where Jeff would do a deep dive and actually analyze these things, even though, again, Jeff would never do that. But again, we'll be running through every season, so let's start off Survivor Borneo. And I think this one's kind of easy, to be honest. I think his favorite episode is obviously the premiere. The Marooning, again, an episode that obviously starts Survivor off, and because of that, I do feel like Jeff would be very nostalgic towards the premiere. Now, I think you could argue the first finale, which in there is the Snakes and Rats speech, but I do think, considering he talks about one of his favorite moments in the history of the show is literally the first ever Marooning, I do think the first ever episode would also be his answer in this spot. Next, moving on to Australian Outback, and this one's also kind of easy as well, where, again, you got a couple things. You got, like, the premiere, which maybe he would find notable. The finale also, same thing, where Colby takes Tina. That could be something, but I do think his favorite episode is still going to be Trial by Fire, the Michael Skupin medevac episode, where straight up, obviously we're keeping in line with what my answers were during my Jeff Probst favorite moments video. And I think a lot of those will correlate to Jeff Probst's favorite episodes, so there will be some differences down the road. But where this one is one where, I mean, to be fair, there isn't really a definitive Probst moment from this season. I don't think Probst has really talked about Australian Outback too much after the fact. But I do think Skupin falling the fire is a moment that he does appreciate for what it meant for Survivor history. And I do think when looking at a list of seasons and trying to declare which one's his favorite, I think this is the one that he would list. Next up for Africa, and this one's very easy. I mean, again, he hasn't really mentioned much from Africa nowadays. I do think the one thing that he does going to be correlate to this, and that is episode 5, The Twist, obviously the first ever swap, where I think that is something that obviously sticks in Jeff's mind. Now, the other considerations were like the episode with the reward to the village, or maybe the finale, just because like Jeff is a pretty big Ethan fan, though I do think at the end of the day, this is the episode that sticks to his mind the most, so I went with that one. That's for Marquesas, and this one's a bit tough, mainly because Jeff has never liked the Marquesas. He talks about the only thing about this season is that we got Boston Rob, and through that, I think the answer will probably be something Boston Rob related. Now, I think you could consider the finale, considering it's one where the first ever rock draw happened, though I doubt he was particularly happy with the result of that season. And then, obviously, the first ever big flip in the game in episode 8 is something I mentioned here, though I doubt Jeff really remembers that. I think the big considerations here will be episode 1, episode 3, and episode 7, all big Boston Rob episodes. Now, I would contemplate episode 5, where Gabe gets voted out, though I'll be honest, I don't think Jeff even remembers that episode. Second, the premiere, I think he would consider as, again, it's the first appearance of Boston Rob. Episode 3 is the episode where Boston Rob takes out Hunter, and that's a big spot for Rob. Though I did end up going with episode 7, True Lies, the merge episode where Boston Rob goes home. Now, again, I do think this is a little bit up for debate, as obviously I think he'll be upset at the vote by the end that Boston Rob gets voted out of the season. But I do think the reason why I would pick this one for him is because I do think Jeff would really hype up how much Boston Rob has grown over the years, and this is the first time Rob got voted out. Along with that, he also comes off as an idiot during the immunity challenge, getting DQ'd because he was showing off, and I feel like that is a moment that Jeff might call out, make this episode, oh, this is a great starting point for Boston Rob, where, again, that's why I wanted this one here. Next up for Thailand, and this is easy. I think the only thing he really remembers from Thailand is episode 7, Assumptions, the fake merge episode. One of the few moments from Thailand he ever mentions in the modern day, and again, I think it is a solid episode with that, to where, again, I think this would easily be his pick. Next for Amazon, I think this one's a bit tough, because I think this is one that probably would differ if Jeff had gone back and rewatched the season, though again, he's not doing that. So again, this is purely based on like, if he were to look at a list of episodes, what would he say? Again, I consider the premiere. I mean, the premiere obviously sets up this men versus women dynamic, and I feel like that could be interesting to him. Then obviously you got like the Alex vote, Christy vote. Again, those are both iconic episodes, though I doubt Jeff really remembers them that well. Also, I consider the finale, considering Rob Cesternino losing and Jenna winning, where maybe he would find that notable, but I do think he would end up picking episode 7, Girls Gone Wilder, the episode where we get the merge, but also Jen and Heidi stripping for chocolate and peanut butter. Now, I will say, he hasn't really talked about this obviously much recently. It is obviously a moment that doesn't really age well, and through that, again, I don't know if Jeff would necessarily pick this in the modern day, but the reality is, he doesn't talk about the Amazon in modern day, to where the only episode here that has any personal connection to Jeff seems to be this one, so that's the one I went with. Next up for Pearl Islands, and this one I do think is pretty easy, though there's a couple considerations. Obviously got the premiere. I think he would reminisce over the initial scene in the village, though, again, I don't think he would pick it. I also would consider What the Part 1, obviously the reveal of the Outcast twist, which he was not happy with at the time, though he has talked more positively about it nowadays, where maybe he would pick that, though I think the answer is obviously episode 11, The Great Lie. Obviously the Grandma Lie episode, and maybe, again, if he had rewatched the episodes, would he pick this one? Maybe not, but I do think this is a spot where obviously he remembers the Grandma Lie. That's one of the most notable moments in Survivor history, and I think this being the episode that contains it, and also, again, if he was literally looking at a list of the episode names and it says The Great Lie, I feel like he would definitely point that one out and say that that's the answer. So again, I went with that. Next up for Survivor All-Stars, and this one's a bit tough because I think there are two lasting impacts from this season for Jeff, both of which revolving around Rob. I think you got the Lex and Rob deal, to which through that you consider episodes 10 and 11, or you got the Rob and Amber storyline, to which you could pick the finale, where obviously they make it to the final two together, though I actually ended up going with the premiere. And there's a couple of reasons for that. One, obviously, again, this is the start of the Boss Rob-Amber relationship, so at least there's that. But also, I do think there's some appeal to him thinking back on it and talk about how excited he was about the season as a whole, where, I mean, he comes out of All-Stars being very negative on the overall experience, talking about how Survivor should have never brought back returnees, to where I do think if he were to look back on it, I think he would have a lot more favorable opinions about the premiere of this season, looking back at when he was still positive about the experience. So again, I decided to go with episode 1 here. Now for Vanuatu, and straight up, I don't think there's a good answer here. I mean, Jeff has not been particularly high on Vanuatu over time, and the issue with Jeff is that, again, when he remembers Vanuatu, what he remembers is Chris outplaying the women, and I'm sure he remembers Julie Berry, though doesn't want to talk about it. I think those are like the two main things he does remember here, but neither of those things are particularly correlated to a specific episode. So through that, again, I think it's very tough to distinguish what he would pick. Now, ones I considered, again, I did consider episode 5, Earthquakes and Shakeups, simply because he might see the word earthquake and be like, oh yeah, there was an earthquake on Survivor. But again, I didn't pick that one. Considered the merge episode, I think that's something he might bring up as like, oh, this is when the men and women went against each other. But obviously, like, I think the natural answer should be like episode 11, which is the Leanne boot. The problem is I don't think Jeff remembers that. And also you consider the finale, considering Chris does go on to win and fulfills the storyline of him outplaying the women. Though I think Jeff also, like, notably had a very negative experience on the day of the finale of Survivor Vanuatu, so where I don't know if he would remember that, to where, again, I'm going to just go with episode 1. They came at us with spears, which, again, I don't know if this is a good answer. I mean, the reality is that, again, I don't think there really is a good answer. But this is one where they had this, like, big ceremony at the beginning of the episode. I can see Jeff remembering that. I could also see him mentioning Chris falling off the balance beam, and that being in addition to Chris's arc. Well, also, again, you have the setup of the men versus women dynamic, to where, again, I think there's enough there. Again, realistically, I don't think there is a good answer for this season, but I felt like the premiere was good enough in this spot. Next up for Palau, and I think there's a few answers here. Jeff does very much like Palau, seemingly, to where, again, I think the answer here would, again, revolve around two different people. It would either be revolving around Stephanie or revolving around Tom. Now, the Stephanie episodes would obviously be episodes 8 and 9. Episode 8 being the episode where she beats Bobby John in fire making. Episode 9 being the one where she's left alone. I think those could be considerations. Episode 10 could also be consideration, considering it's the introduction of Exile Island, where at least maybe he'll remember that. But I do think at the end of the day, he would go something Tom related. I do think episode 7 is something to mention here, called The Great White Shark Hunter, which, while I doubt he remembers the episode as a whole, it's at least the episode where Tom catches a shark, so that's something. But I do think his answer would end up being the finale, the ultimate shock, for a few reasons. Obviously, Tom going on the win, I think, was a very satisfying ending to him. Also, I think the final immunity challenge is one of his favorite moments in Survivor history, to where I think those two moments in a singular episode would be enough to make this the pick for him. Next for Guatemala, and again, how much of Guatemala does he remember? I mean, he does like Danny, so I mean, I did consider like a couple of like Danny-centric episodes, obviously the finale, where she goes on to win, or episode 12, Price of Immunity, where she wins the advantage in the auction, gets saved that episode, though I do think the answer here still ends up being episode 8, The Hidden Immunity Idol, aka the episode that introduced the Hidden Immunity Idol, where straight up, I think that's probably the only thing he remembers from this season at this point, to where, and this is the episode where it got introduced. Is it actually the greatest episode in the world? No, not really. It's fine. But again, I do think that's the answer he would pick here. Next for Panama. And I think this is an obvious answer, but I don't think it's the one that you would expect. I do think most people would probably say the 3-2-1 episode, episode 12, or maybe go for like the Bob Dog episode, which is this really hectic character-based episode, or even the Bruce medevac. But again, Jeff is not remembering those. The answer he's going to go with here is episode 1, The First Exile. Now, you might question, why is he going to pick episode 1? And the answer is because Cirie is scared of leaves. It's right. I think that is a lot of it. I think really, again, this is the start of Suri. I think the main thing he remembers from this season is Suri. And with this being this big Suri episode where, again, she starts off scared of leaves, but then she saves herself and votes out Tina. I feel like that is something he would remember here. I think that would make this the most notable episode of the bunch for him. Next up for Cook Islands. And this one's a bit tough. I think there's a few considerations. I mean, a major one was the finale where, again, I did pick the Yul versus Ozzy Final 3 as his favorite moment from the season, where, again, the fact that that happens in the finale, obviously, is something to mention here. I did also consider the merge episode where Penner flips. I think that's something he would also very much like. I did also consider Plan Voodoo, as maybe he remembers that this is the start of the split vote idea, and maybe he cares about that, which he probably doesn't. However, the one I did end up going with here is episode 9, Mutiny, the episode with the mutiny. Where, again, I think he would remember this as a big episode. And again, when purely looking at this from an episode title perspective, this episode literally just being called Mutiny, I think it's something that probably helps this one, where, again, if he's looking at a list of episodes, he says, oh, Mutiny, that was a big moment in the season. I think Ozzy, like, starting this underdog arc for the IT4, I think that is something he would mention here. Next for Fiji, and I mean, this is one where, again, there's a couple considerations, but again, he notoriously did not like Fiji. Again, I think the common answer would be episode 10, It's a Turtle, where Edgardo goes home, though straight up, I don't think he remembers that. I think the things he does remember are the Yao and Dreams deal, where he talks about this many times post-show, that this is the only good thing about the season, where because that, I think episodes 13 and 14 are the considerations. Ozzy episode 14 is where the deal culminates and Dreams ends up voting out Yao, though I think the pick here is episode 13. I want to see if I can make a deal, which is where the deal is actually made. And because of that, again, I do think that is what he would pick here, especially when seeing the episode titles. I think that would remind him of the deal, where, again, I think he'd pick this. And reality is, again, this is actually a decent episode. I mean, this is where Yao Man saves himself with an idol, where there's that. I mean, again, would Jeff remember that? No, I think he'll only remember the car deal, but again, it's actually not that terrible of a pick. Now for China, and China's one of these seasons, I don't think there is this really, like, landmark episode outside the one that we're going to be picking here, to where I don't know how much of the season he would really remember from an episode by episode basis, to where, again, the answer I'm going to go with here is episode 11, Ready to Bite the Apple. The episode where James gets voted out with 2 idols in his pocket, which I think is the main moment he remembers from the season. So again, I think that's the pick to go with here. Next up for Micronesia, and there's a very easy answer here. Again, a lot of other considerations. Episode 9, I'm in such a hot pickle. The episode where the it's a effing stick moment happens, I think that'll be on his mind. The Ozzy blindside, episode 10 is something he'll probably remember. Episode 12, when Amanda plays her idol and they have this like editing trick of not showing you that she found the idol, I think is something that he would potentially remember. Obviously, the answer here is not even close. If it smells like a rat, give it cheese, aka the Eric blindside, which, again, he talks about constantly as one of his favorite moments in Survivor history. I do think this is like kind of a no-brainer, where I would not be shocked if this is something that he would even declare as like his favorite episode of all time. I do think this is very high on his board to get easily to pick here. Next up for Gabon, and Gabon's one that doesn't have a good answer. Again, he doesn't like Gabon. I don't think any of these episodes really stand the test of time. Yeah, I do think the episode to mention here is episode 9, Nothing Tastes Better Than $500, which is really a great episode. I mean, probably really an all-timer. I mean, it's one with the auction, where we get the Randy Sugar moment. It's also one where Bob has the fake idol that he gives to Randy. Randy ends up getting voted out. We also have the iconic confessionals as he does so. Again, it's a fantastic episode. I don't know how much of that Jeff remembers yet. Again, I don't think he remembers much of Gabon just in general. And I think one of the things he does remember is Bob's fake idols, where, again, maybe this is the episode that would pop into his head. Maybe he would be reminding things by the title itself. But again, I decided to go with this one here. Next up for Tokachins, this one's pretty easy. I think you can consider the finale where JT ends up winning, because I think he was pretty happy with that result. But I think the obvious answer here is the penultimate episode, The Martyr Approach, aka the Coach episode, where Jeff clearly loved Coach. And obviously there are other like Coach-related episodes. I mean, The Dragon Slayer is literally an episode title. But I do think The Martyr Approach is one that I think they do remember just how over the top they portrayed Coach across this episode. I think this is the episode that is essentially just the Coach episode, and through that, I think production holds this episode in high regard, where, again, I do think Jeff would pick this rival. Now for Samoa, and Samoa's one I think there is probably an easy answer here. I mean, there's a couple other considerations. Episodes 8 and 9 are pretty hectic episodes. In the post-merge, obviously get the iconic Kelly blindside within that, though. I do think the answer for him would probably be episode 1, The Puppet Master. Again, Russell's first episode, I think that would be the main thing he remembers. Again, the introduction of Russell, this guy who finds out without a clue. Mind you, that's not in episode 1, but I'm sure he can convince himself that did happen in episode 1. Well, we also have him like telling the story about Katrina. And again, I do feel like Jeff remembers moments of this episode, and with it also being the introduction to Russell Hantz, which, well, again, he doesn't like Russell Hantz nowadays. I still think he talks about Russell Hantz favorably in terms of like his impact on the show, to where again I do think Russell would be definitely top of mind for him on this season, obviously, to where again I think he would pick episode 1 as the introduction to him. Next up for Heroes vs. Villains, in this one there's a pretty easy answer to, again, couple considerations. Episode 1, Slay Everyone, Trust No One, I think is obviously an iconic episode. I'm sure he would be really, really hyped to talk about the introduction of the season, though I did not go with that. Episode 6, Banana Etiquette, obviously is an iconic episode where Tyson votes himself out, though I think the easy answer here is still episode 10, Going Down in Flames, obviously the Parvati double idol play, which he still constantly talks about as like the best move in Survivor history. I do think this would be the very clear answer for him. Again, as someone that loves Parvati, I do think this would be his by far number 1 for these. Next up for Nicaragua, and there's no good answer for Nicaragua. Where again, this is another one like Vanuatu, where there's not really any good like independent episodes that Jeff would remember, where obviously like if it was me, I would mention like the Kelly B blind side. Again, I don't know if Jeff remembers that particularly well. Obviously Double Quit episode's a big episode that obviously he doesn't look at that favorably, to where I just went with the finale. I went with episode 15, What About Me? The episode where Fabio wins. And again, maybe that's good enough. I mean, Jeff did really love Fabio at the time. And again, seeing in this episode, Fabio does culminate his immunity run, I think, is something he would remember. Now, to be fair, I think you could also consider the previous episode, which also has aspects of Fabio winning immunity, but also like Jane having a bit of an outburst on her way out, or maybe he'd remember that one more, though I don't know how much he remembers Jane nowadays. So, man, I just went with the finale in this spot. Next up for Redemption Island, and there's so many options. Because again, Jeff does love this season. I do think big considerations, the premiere. Again, this introduction of Rob and Russell to the show, and Rob does pull off a big move by the end. Maybe you consider that. Also, the merge episode's definitely a big consideration. Where again, Matt coming back from Redemption Island, only for Rob to send him back out. I think that would be a serious contender, though I think the answer that I assume he would pick would be the finale. Episode 14 seems like a no-brainer, aka the Boston Rob winning episode, which I'm sure he adores. There again, I think practically probably episode 8 is probably the better pick, because I do think Jeff probably remembers that as well, though, again, Jeff loves Boston Rob winning, so I went with the finale here instead. Next up for South Pacific, and again, a few considerations. Episode 1, and bring back Ozzy and Coach, along with also the introduction to Cochran. I'm sure he likes those things. Episode 7 is one I considered as well, where Ozzy creates his plan to throw himself into Redemption Island. I think he would also consider that, though I do think the answer here is episode 8, Double Agent, the episode where Cochran ends up flipping against Hawaii. And again, it's a very Cochran-centric episode, which means Jeff very much likes it, as again, he loves Cochran. I think this is a good starting point for Cochran. I think this is a moment that he'll mention about the rockiness of Cochran's first time. To be fair, I think you could also consider the episode where Cochran almost beats Ozzy at Redemption Island, though, and considering that was such a minor aspect of the episode, I did not pick that one. But again, I think his South Pacific pick would be revolving around Cochran. I think this one being such a major Cochran episode, while also being such a major vote for the season, I decided to go with this one here. Next up for One World, and this one is a bit tough. I think there's a couple considerations. I know he loves Kim Spradlin, so I considered the finale, where Kim wins, though did not go with that. The major considerations were episodes 4 to episodes 10. Episode 4, where the men end up giving up immunity, the vote out Bill Posley, or the one I went with here, which is episode 10, I'm No Dummy, aka the This Is My Island episode, which again, I know he loved at the time. He loved Troyzan. Now, I would say, again, as time goes on, obviously, I don't think he loves Troyzan as much. So, again, maybe reassessing the season nowadays, maybe he would go with episode 4 instead. But, I mean, based on the interviews we hear about him from this season, again, he really did love Troyzan. And with this entire episode pretty much just being almost entirely Troyzan, just Troyzan trying to play from the bottom, I feel like that would be good enough to make it Jeff's pick. Next, I'm moving on to Philippines. And here again, I think there's probably a definitive answer. You can consider the premiere, the return of all these medevac players, and obviously you got the Zane night of it all. Though I didn't go with that, I did also consider the finale, where again, Malcolm loses the game in the tragic way he does, where again, I think he would also consider that, but I did end up going with episode 8, Dead Man Walking. Now, this one is a little bit up in the air, simply because the question is, how much does he remember this episode? Because I think if this was at the time, I think he would definitely say this. He would talk about how this was the best tribal in Survivor history up to that point, to where, again, I know he was very positive on it at the time. I just don't know if that is really stuck, but again, going with it anyway. I think it is a very good episode. It's probably my personal pick for favorite episode of the season, so again, I decided to still go with it. Next up for Karamoan, I think there's 2 big options. You got Three Amigos, you got Cochran winning. So essentially, again, finale or episode 10. Again, I thought it'd be funny to pick the finale just because, again, Cochran winning, but again, it's not that good of an episode in reality, to where also mixing down the fact that I think he definitely held the Three Amigos tribal in very high regard. I did end up going to episode 10, zipping over to Cuckoo's Nest, where, again, this was really this like true start to like the big moves era. And I think this is a tribal that Jeff holds in very, very high regard, to where, if anything can beat Jeff Probst's love of Cochrane, I do think his love of big moves would be something to go for here. So again, I did go with episode 10 in this spot. Next up for Blood versus Water, and there's two major considerations. I mean, it's, again, Sierra voting out her mom, or we got the rock draw. I think it's tough for him. I mean, for me personally, I think it's very easily episode 12, Russell Feathers, but I do think he would go with episode 10, Big Bad Wolf. Again, the episode where Sierra votes out her mom. I think that's a big enough moment for him, and it really playing into the Blood versus Water theme. It's really exactly what they wanted to get out of the Blood versus Water theme, to where I think Jeff would easily pick this one, even though, again, he probably should go the other way. Next for Cagayan. I think Cagayan's a tough one, actually, because I think when Jeff talks about this season, he usually talks about it a lot in generalities, not in terms of specific moments, or like really minor moments, but not really these like bigger, grander moments, where I think it's kind of tough to gauge which episode would he declare is his favorite. Now, again, I think he was very happy with the premiere. Obviously, Chatia dumping the rice and voting out Garrett. I think that is something to mention here. Episode 2 is named Cops Are Us, to where maybe he would remember it because the title. Episode 9 is called Sitting in My Spy Shack, so maybe he would like it because of the Spy Shack, even though it's actually a good episode beyond that. And I could see him considering the finale, where Tony goes on the win, tricks Woo, and I think those are all considerations. I still went with episode 6, Head of the Snake, the merge episode, where, and I don't know how much Jeff remembers this anymore, but I do think at the time he had to recognize how incredible of a tribal this was, to where, considering all the hecticness you have going on outside that, again, I decided to still go with this one, even though, again, there's no real proof for any of these. So, again, I decided this was the best pick to go with, as it, again, it's probably clearly the best episode of the season. Next up for San Juan del Sur, and this one's a bit tough, too. I think there's, again, a decent amount of considerations in the post-merge, but, again, this is a season that Jeff also did not particularly love. I think the main takeaway he gets from this season is the underdog run of Natalie, which isn't even that much of an underdog run, but, again, let's talk about Natalie getting revenge. So again, there's episodes that you can consider with this. Again, episode 10 is the episode after the Jeremy boot, where we almost have this big blindside on John Mish, though again, I doubt he fully remembers that. Episode 13 is the episode where Natalie does blindside John Mish, and I feel like that is something that he would probably remember a bit more. The finale is also something to consider, considering Natalie ends up winning there, and the Baylor move happens, which I don't know how much he remembers that, but again, that is also a good moment. I do think the episode he would pick here, though, is episode 9, Get Into Crunch Time, aka the Jeremy boot episode, where again, it's the episode that, again, starts the Natalie revenge arc, but also is the downfall of Jeremy, who is obviously also a modern legend of the game, to where, yeah, I think it kind of involves like two major storylines to him. Again, the end of Jeremy's first run, while also the true start of Natalie's winning trajectory, to where, again, I do think this is the pick he would go with. Now for Worlds Apart, and this one's a little bit difficult. Again, it's another season that he liked at the time. Yeah, I don't know what specific episode he was necessarily loving. Now, again, episode 10, I think, is probably the best episode of the season. The episode where Mike turns his back at the auction, becomes this big target. I can see that being consideration. I also consider episode 11, Survivor Russian Roulette, which was obviously like a really good tribal there. However, I ended up actually going the finale. It's a fickle game, where obviously Mike goes on the win. He was very excited by a Mike win, where again, I don't know where he stands on Mike now, but I think at the time, I think it's something that he would obviously very highly respect. But also, I think something that would also linger in his mind is how great of a night he had during the finale, which obviously this was the night where the Cambodia cast was revealed, and maybe, to be fair, maybe that would overshadow the finale, but I still think when he looks at the Worlds Apart finale, he also reminisces about the Cambodia cast reveal, which I do think, wow, again, is this actually a genuine answer? Is he actually going to answer this episode because of its actual merit within the season? No, but I do think that is something that would factor in here. Also, that would make this episode feel a little bit more memorable to him. So again, I do think he would pick the answer by the end. Next up for Cambodia, and again, a few considerations. He loves the season. Episode 1 is definitely something to consider in the premiere, where again, it's getting back all these returning players, but also you do have Ellie Wentworth getting the idol in the challenge. I think that's also something to mention. Episode 8, You Call Will Hall, is obviously the episode where Kelly Wentworth idles out Savage. I feel like that's also a big moment for him. Yeah, the answer I am going with here is actually the finale, Lie, Cheat, and Steal, an episode that, again, has Jeremy going on the win. I'm sure he is fine with that. I do think the bigger moment, though, is the final 6 round. I think that is something that he largely remembers, getting the no votes tribal. He still talks to this day about how he had to go out the reunion show and explain the vote on a whiteboard. And again, he still loves this moment. I do think this is the main moment from the season that he largely remembers, to where, again, considering it's in a finale where he also declared one of the best players of all time, I do think it is something that he would definitely remember. Next up for Ko Wrong, and this one was tough for me initially until I remembered that obviously it's a specific answer, but again, I considered episodes 9, episodes 10, both really good episodes. Again, you got the Debbie Blindside where Scott and Jason are doing a lot of antics there. Episode 10 is the Scott Blindside, which is obviously probably the biggest moment of the season gameplay-wise, though I think the answer is easily episode 4, Signed, Sealed, and Delivered, the Caleb medevac episode where, and obviously it's this massive dramatic moment for the show, but one that I do think they were very happy with how the episode turned out. I think I remember at the time, they were talking a lot about the behind the scenes of the episode, and it seemed like they were like genuinely proud of this episode. Obviously, it was a very scary situation while it was happening. I do think it is probably the most notable moment of the season for Jeff himself, to where, again, I did go with that one here. Next up for Millennials versus Gen X, and this one's a little bit tough. I mean, you got some considerations. Episode 7, I Will Destroy You, the episode where Michaela goes out, I think is something to consider, where I know he loved the exit from Michaela on that season. They literally brought it back the following season, to where I think that's definitely a consideration. Also, we'll consider the finale, where, again, I think, well, again, who knows where he stands on Adam now. I think at the time, he was very sympathetic towards, obviously, Adam's situation. Him going on the win there is definitely an impactful arc. Also, I know you love the J Fake Idol play, to where, again, I think that would definitely be in contention, though. I end up going with episode 10, $1 Million Gamble. I mean, it's kind of the easy answer here. It's the episode with the rock draw, which I know they were very excited about at the time. I think the question is what else he remembers for the episode, which probably not much. Where it was actually a 2-part episode. I mean, it's one where the rock draw is actually in the second hour, and the first hour was the Chris Hammond's boot. But again, I think it's an episode you definitely will like. I believe this is also the episode where the Brett Zeke moment happens, where they bond over their experiences on the reward. Where, again, I think it's an episode he would definitely remember. So again, I did go with that one. God. Next up for Game Changers, and this one's a little bit tough. I mean, I did consider episode 3, The Tables Have Turned, the episode where Malcolm goes out, which is obviously the first live tribal, and definitely something that Jeff would remember, though I didn't go with it here. I did also consider episode 6, What Happens in Exile Stays in Exile, aka the Jeff Varner outing Zeke episode, which, again, I think this is a tough thing at this point, where obviously this is a very situation, and I do think production mishandles it to some degree, but I do think Jeff came out of it, though, loving this episode, and coming out of it, like, again, they end up winning GLAAD awards for it, and again, I do think this episode ended up being a positive for Jeff himself, to where, again, I considered it, though I do think it would be very icky for Jeff himself to say that, to where, again, I don't think he would necessarily pick it, even though I think he'll probably be thinking it. However, I am going with the finale, No Good Deed Goes Unpunished, aka Evangelion. The rest of the episode, I'm thinking he's, like, probably fine with. I mean, I know he, like, remembers postseason about how Brad Culpepper messed up. He could have won if he didn't take Sarah to the end, which, again, questionable. But beyond that, I think the main thing he remembers, though, is Evangelion. Again, he loves Evangelion. I know, obviously, most people don't. But, again, he thinks it's a great moment. Even Sari thinks it's a good moment, so that's something. But still, I think he came out of that thinking that this is an all-time great tribal council. So again, I think he is just extremely high on the episode as a whole. So, again, I think he would go with it. Next up for HHH, and I mean, I think it's pretty easy to say what his favorite episode is. Again, he loves Ben. I think you would consider episode 11 the start of Ben's underdog arc, where he plays the idol and idles out Lauren, though I think the easy answer is the finale, $1 Million Night, aka the episode where Ben obviously wins, but also within that, he also still plays it out at 5 and saves himself. Also within that, at Final 4, he obviously has the forced fire-making twist. All of that, I think Jeff adores, and again, it's like mixing all these things together. I think it does leave this being a very positive episode for Jeff, even though the rest of the fan base probably doesn't think so. But again, I think Jeff does look at this very highly. Next up, for Survivor Ghost Island, and I think this is pretty easy. I don't even know if there's another answer that Jeff would even remember anymore. I'm going to go with the finale. It's Game Time, kids, aka the finale where Dominic and Wendell tie. And I think that's the big moment he remembers from the season. Again, I think maybe you consider the merge episode with the Chris Noble situation, but I think this is definitively the answer. I don't even know if there's another episode that really sticks out to him of the bunch here. I mean, maybe you can go with the premiere, which by the end of the premiere, which was like a 2-hour episode, you did have the Donathan moment. So, I mean, maybe there's that, but I do think he would go with the finale here. Next up, for David versus Goliath, I think this one's pretty easy, but it's probably not the episode that you're thinking. Now, again, episode 8 is probably my personal favorite episode. Again, the John Hennigan blindside, where I think it's a big moment. I don't think he would pick it, though. I think he would consider episode 5, Jackets and Eggs, obviously the episode with Angelina's jacket, and that being a very notable episode. But I think the easy answer for him is episode 9, Breath First Search. For a couple of reasons. I mean, obviously the name Breath First Search would remind him of Christian, who he loves, and Christifying an idol. I think that is definitely something to note. But also, this is the episode where Dan Rangering gets idol nullified out of the game. And I think that is a moment that he loved at the time. I think he was very high on idol nullifier at the time. So again, I think he loved the vote off. I think he would remember, and the Christian of it all as well. Again, I think it's kind of a double positive there. So again, I feel like that's the one he would go with. Next for Edge of Extinction, and I think this one's super easy. I think there's only one answer to consider here, and that is the finale. I See the $1 Million, aka the episode where Chris Underwood comes back from the Edge and goes on the win. Now, beyond that, again, like I think he loves the Edge in general, to where again, when we're looking at like individual moments, I think you can look at like Reem's experience on the Edge, but I don't think there's like a specific episode to narrow that down to. So without that, again, I think the finale is just the easy answer. I mean, it's an episode where it really just justifies the Edge of Extinction existing. Again, it leads to the winner coming from the Edge of Extinction. Well, also, again, there also being a pretty hectic endgame here as well, where, again, I think Jeff was very, very happy with how this finale turned out, especially considering you also have the Chris throwing himself in the fire against Rick Devens and beating him. So again, I do think there's a lot to go with here, and I think this would be his pick. Next up for IOI, and this one's a bit tough. I don't think any of these episodes really stick out to him at this point. I think episode 1, I vote you out, and that's it, is an episode to mention, as again, it's the episode where Rob and Sandra get introduced, and I think he was pretty excited about that coming into the season, though again, I did not pick that. I also considered episode 8, we made it to the merge episode, which again, I think is known by most of the fan base as one of the worst episodes in the history of the show. I will say, really, to me, it's like the sense that I get is that this is like an episode that they liked, especially with Jeff coming out pretty good and him scolding Spilo by the end, until they saw the negative reception online and it was like, oh shit. So again, I don't think he would ever answer that, but if I were to guess, I would say they liked this episode when they were making it, where I do think they thought they handled the Dan Spilo situation very well, when obviously they clearly didn't. But the pick I'm going to go with here is the finale, Mama Look at Me Now, where, again, it's a very good episode. It's probably the best episode of the season. I think from Jeff's point of view at this point, again, obviously, I think he'll try to forget about the Dan Spilo situation. So again, the Dan Spilo situation really encompasses the entire season, where, again, this being the episode after Dan goes, and we actually have like a very fun endgame. I feel like that's what he would more likely pick nowadays, even though now we move on to Survivor 40, and this one's a bit tough, as again, I think there's a lot of consideration, considering in he clearly loves this season. The major ones, again, being the premiere, I think it's another one of these situations where I think he would just be in awe at what they were able to do and bring back all these winners. So again, I think that'll be top of mind. Obviously, This Is Extortion's definitely an iconic episode. I'm sure he even recognized that, considering how much content they gave to Tony, but I'm gonna go with the finale here. It all boils down to this. I know Jeff was like very hyped for this finale coming into the season, talking about how that's the best finale of all time, and along with that, Ozzy continuously praised the season as the best of all time, where again, I think the answer is the finale. I think he likes, again, Natalie coming back from the Edge, proceeding to get to the end of the game. We also have this, again, hectic Final 6 tribal. We also have Tony versus Sarah fire making, and I think there is a lot to like there from Jeff's point of view. So again, I think it is the answer here. Next up for 41, and this one's a bit tough. I think there's a few considerations. I think the premiere is something he'll mention as, again, finally getting back to filming the show after a bit of a break there. I'm sure there was a lot of hype for that. Also, I considered episode 7, There's Gonna Be Blood, the second episode of Mergatory, where we have the Knowledge is Power play. I think the reason I would not pick this one, though, is because I do think Jeff has become a bit more negative on the Hourglass twist as time goes on. Not because he doesn't like it. I still think he likes the Hourglass twist, but more so, he obviously recognized how negatively the audience responded to it, to where, again, I think he would be reluctant to pick this one now. So because of that, I think the answer is going to be episode 10, Baby with a Machine Gun, where, again, I know at the time they talked very positively about this episode. So, obviously, this is an episode that most people talk about as one of the best of the season, one of the best of the new era, and I do think Jeff at the time was particularly happy with how the episode turned out from a storytelling perspective, to where, even though, again, I don't know how he feels about Shan necessarily at this point, I do feel like this is an episode that very much stands out. So again, that's the pick here. Next up for 42, and again, I think there's a few considerations, but I thought the final answer was pretty easy. I mean, you got episode 9, Game of Chicken, the episode where we get the Mary Andrea moment, which I'm sure he was, again, happy and how that was overall presented by the end. Episode 12, the Omer blindside, is something to mention here, as again, he loves Marianne, and this is like Marianne's game-winning move, to where I think you consider that. Also, I consider the finale simply because Marianne wins, though realistically it's not the greatest finale, but again, I end up actually going with episode 3, Go for the Gusto, an episode that, again, I'm sure he loved at the time. Obviously, all this hecticness with people losing their votes, and really this being like a justification for the new era to him, where again, he talks about how much he loves the idea of small tribes, people losing votes, and I think the fact that we got such a crazy tribal in this episode is really just justifying the format of the new era to him, to where, again, I do think that is the one he would go with. For 43, and this one's so easy, I don't even think there's another consideration on the board. It is episode 12, Telenovela, the Cody blindside, where again, he adored this episode at the time. I think, and obviously praised Jesse throughout it, called this a Hall of Fame move for Jesse. Also, obviously, the entire fandom loves it, and I think that kind of comes back to him as well. Where again, I think he very much loved this episode. I don't really think there's an argument for another episode in this season, especially considering he didn't love the season as a whole. Where again, I do think telenovela is probably the easy answer of the bunch. Now for 44, and this one's tough because I don't think there's a solid answer. I mean, even when I was trying to determine what my favorite episode was, I really struggled because I don't think there is a single really landmark episode of the bunch, yet Jeff really loved this season. So the question is, which one is he going to go with? I mean, episode 1 is something to mention here, as obviously, again, we get this idol play by the end, but also we do have Bruce's medevac, which I'm sure, and while scary at the time, I think he did like how that was presented on the show. I also considered episode 2 because of Carolyn with the birdcage idol, which he talks about as one of his favorite moments in the new era, which, like, sure, I guess, maybe you would consider that. Episode 4, I'm Felicia, the episode where Sarah Wade gets out by Josh, I think could be a big episode, as obviously one that's very Vantage focused. And also, again, he likes Sarah Wade, so again, maybe that's something. Episode 7, the episode where Matt gets screwed over, I think is also an episode to talk about. And again, while I hated it, I think he liked it, so that's something. Episode 8, the episode where Brandon gets out of the game, I think is a consideration. As kind of the start of the Tika 3, starting to gain traction in the game. Episode 11 is also a good episode where Danny gets voted out of the game. Really solidifies the dominance of the Tika 3, though the answer I end up going with here is the finale. Absolute banger season, which, what a title. Again, I think that's the answer he's going to go with. I think it's an episode where Ozzy Jam Jam wins. I think he was very happy about the Jam Jam win. I think also Carson losing out in fire is something that, while tragic, I think it's something that they were like proud of how that was presented and foreshadowed across the season. Also, I do think they love the moment between Jam Jam and Carson, where Jam Jam helps Carson learn how to make fire. So again, I think all these things, I think kind of amounts to this being the answer, where, I mean, like, realistically, I could definitely see it being more like episode 4, episode 8 in particular, but I do think as time goes on, I do think his lasting impact will be the Tika 3, and I do think this being the culmination of the Tika 3 storyline would make this the pick by the end of it. Next up for 45, and this one's very easy, where initially I was thinking it's going to be episode 6, I'm Not Batman, I'm the Canadian, the episode where obviously Caleb plays his shot in the dark successfully, and to be honest, if we didn't have other proof for this, I would have picked this one, though we do literally have proof that his answer is episode 8, Following a Dead Horse to Water, aka the Kelly Blindside episode, which again, I know he was very proud of at the time. Really talked about the episode, really talked about the Kelly Blindside as a whole, talking about it's the climax of the season, and it being like one of the greatest moments of the show, and having this like really raw reaction from Kelly as she leaves. Beyond that, also you have the auction, which I think he was very proud of the return of the auction, even though again, questionable if he should be. But again, I think overall, I think this is just the episode he would pick. I mean, literally he retweeted Dalton Ross's article saying it's the best episode of the new era, and I think that is something that he probably would agree with. Next up for 46, and this one's another one. I think there's a few considerations. I mean, episode 4 is an episode that obviously I think most people looked at as one of the worst episodes of the season. However, I know Jeff was very positive about it, like really hyped up how well edited it was, with like Banu going through the stages of grief, though I didn't pick that. Episode Several is an episode I did consider, as I know that was one that Jeff also very much liked, like the immunity challenge in particular, though I did not pick that. I also consider episode 9 Spicy Jeff, because the title's Spicy Jeff, which I'm sure he'll be happy about, but also is the Hunter Blindside. I think that was also a good episode. I also consider episode 10, again, obviously the Liz Meltdown episode, but I did end up going with episode 8, Hide and Seek, where, and this is an episode that has a few things going for it, and one, it's a very Q-focused episode in a spot where, again, Jeff adored Q across the season. This is also an episode that he very much hyped up before it was happening. I think that plays a factor as well, and also it culminates into Tevin Blindside in a spot where, again, he loves Tevin as well, and I think it's kind of like all these factors merging together to where, again, I think by the end of it, this would be the easy pick. Now for Survivor 47, where I do feel like there is a pretty obvious answer here, but again, I think there's a few considerations. I know episode 4 is one that he was kind of high on, the Keyshawn boot, where I know he was really hyping up Genevieve during this episode, like how they edited Genevieve's realization about her targeting Keyshawn, but again, did not pick that one. I also did consider episode 9, Nightmare Fuel, the episode where Saul ends up going home, where again, I know this one was like really hyped up before the episode came out, having this really dynamic tribal. Yeah, and the answer here I think is pretty obvious. It's episode 12, Operation Italy, where again, Operation Italy I think is by far the most notable episode of the season. While again, I think you debate if it's my personal favorite, I think it is the one that most people will talk about. And I think it's the one that he very much hyped at the time, talked about how great of a move it was, and also talked about how much he loved how they edited the episode and making it this like heist sequence like Ocean's 11. And again, I think he very much loved Operation Italy as an episode. episode. So again, I think it's an easy pick here. But again, with that is every season of Survivor. Talking about, I think Jeff Probst's favorite episode from every season is now, again, down the road, maybe I'll continue this series of doing more Jeff Probst favorite videos. I don't know if I have much more to make, but again, if I come up with an idea, again, stay tuned for those at some point. Beyond that, also, again, expect more of the same style of content for down the road. But for now, that is the video. Thank you for watching.